Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I thought I'd do a video putting out basically my thoughts for the Season 3 of World War Mode. I think it's safe to say, at least for me personally, this season was the worst out of the three, mainly due to many factors that we'll go through in this video. It was at least the least enjoyable from a personal point of view, mainly because a lot of the vehicles used were pretty much top-tier vehicles. There was a lot of differences between them, and, well, if you didn't have them, it wasn't exactly a good time. So we'll go through the pros first. There is a small list, and we'll go through the cons as well, and also some ways of fixing these issues. The reason why it's taken a while to do this video is because I've asked, for people to give their own thoughts, so I can try and mix and match and see if I agree with them, and all of that good jazz. So let's get into the pros. The first part is commanding is still pretty enjoyable to do, and it's also enjoyable to watch. Trying to think 5 steps ahead or trying to work out how to break the system is pretty interesting. There's a lot of good conversations around this. There's a lot of good conversations around the operations. The problem is, even though the problem was that there was only 2 operations, so once you kind of figured them out, that pretty much meant that, you could just do that over and over and over again. But when I did command, and when watching others such as Sound and Fury from TechFS, or Kate from TechWS Command, or Punchy from Class, it was a fun experience, and maybe that's just because of my background in RTSs, but I personally find it really enjoyable. The next one is it still gives me the multiplayer Total War feel. The idea that you have an overall map that somebody's commanding, and then when you go into a battle, you have a bunch of individual players in it fighting. And this is something which other games haven't really been able to encapsulate. Something which is melding the RTS genre with the FPS, or, whatever you want to call it, genre that War Thunder is, the combat genre. Where normally in a Total War setting or many other game settings, it is all controlled by one person. Now you have actual, units on the ground controlled by individuals. And I still think that is World War Mode's major characteristic, which is really interesting. The next one is it is still nice playing in large squadron battles. Having 20 TechES members together, seeing them all come over the hill together after spawning in is a wonderful sight. It is something to really marvel at, and it's something that I love to see in stuff like custom battles. I love to see in stuff like World War Mode, and I hope that feeling still continues. The challenge system that they brought back from Season 2 is great, and this is the system where, you have certain challenges you have to do each operation, such as wins or kills or assists, and basically all you have to do is complete them, and you get yourself all of the rewards available. I think this system is much better than the system from the first season, which was heavily top player centric, and I am not a fan of people price gouging, and I'm not a fan of the sweaty part of the general community. When it comes to SL and RP, one of the things that Season 1 and Season 2 didn't have were good gains in that department. You got a little bit of SL, but RP was very much lacking. Now, with the fact that there's a lot of top-tier vehicles here, if you are actually researching stuff, you get really good SL and really good RP. From one of the operations that we played, which I think we won in about an hour and 20, it netted me 250,000 SL. Plus, on top of that, a ton of RP to some Soviet vehicles. I was able to grind out 2 rank 6 vehicles while playing World War Mode, which, if you told me that in Season 2, I'd tell you you're living a dream. So yeah, I think the SL and the RP gains were much better this time. Maybe that is just because of the fact that we were using higher tier vehicles, and therefore that meant that the gains were higher, but we shall have to see. And the next one is after completing operation, you got a nice amount of SL for victory or loss if you'd participated in the battles. Obviously the commander didn't get that, which was a real problem that we'll get into, but overall, that's still nice that there is a reason to stick about in an operation and give it a go. So that's the pros. It's a short list, because a lot of the things that were pros of World War Mode I've mentioned before in Season 1 and Season 2, so there's not really much point in repeating them again without, repeating myself ad nauseum. So let's talk about the cons. The cons list is a little bit longer. So the first one is the gift vehicles. I think the M60 AMBT is fine as a gift vehicle, the Turkish M60, but the main issue with something like the M60 AMBT is that it's going to break top-tier matchmaking for at least a week, maybe two, making all of the data from that area pretty much useless. So therefore, if we want more, let's call it top-tier balance, or you want more decent data around the fact of top-tier, now you're not going to get it because there's going to be a massive amount of people playing the M60 MBT, especially because it came out at 10.0. It's already gone down to 9.7, and I still think it's not a very good vehicle. The M60 platform is not grand. But, it is there. It will give people who don't have top-tier vehicles a top-tier experience, whether they want to grind, to top-tier or not, and it isn't premium, so therefore you have to spade it and stuff, and you don't get at a 9.7 premium, which would be the highest in the game, at least for ground. The IL2, though, makes absolutely no sense. So the whole point of this operation, or this season, was supposed to be, it was an alt history, at least for the Fulda Gap point of view, an alt history look at what the Soviets invading Western Europe would look like. Why is the IL2 there? A 1940s vehicle which was made because they were worried that they wouldn't have enough engines for the standard IL-2, so they made a separate one with a separate engine. This, for the season, it just doesn't make any sense. It reminds me of the Sublinder again from Season 1, where the Sublinder was the main prize, but it wasn't a World War II vehicle. It wasn't anything like it wasn't anything like a vehicle that made any sense to any of the operations, because France wasn't even involved, but for some reason it's there, and that's what the IL-2 feels like to me. When it comes to the other prizes, though, the decals, the guns, the decorations, the camouflages, that's all on point, that's very standard, it all looks very nice, and no gripes with them. The next one is the major issue. And this is an issue which I remember at the time talking about this World War Mode before it started, that it was going to be the biggest issue. It was so obvious to so many people when it came to it. So being given less than 2 weeks to grind out 3 top-tier nations' vehicles, and not just ground vehicles, but also air vehicles, and also helicopters, if you wanted to be fully combat effective. So if you were a person who had decided to let's say go down the French tree, the Italian tree, the British tree, or anything like that, you would have to, from scratch, in 2 weeks, grind out 3 top-tier nations. That's not happening. I tried my best to try and give the maximum efficiency look on what you could maybe do when grinding out these vehicles. I was able to grind out, I believe it was 8 390,000 RP vehicles in about 13 days. So we were averaging a vehicle every 1.5 days, which is ridiculous grind, And I wasn't using premiums, so I could have halved that technically, so done 8 vehicles in about 6.5 days, but that's still something that nobody should be expected to do. I was playing around about maybe 8 to 10 hours a day, after coming back from work, and I wanted to just see how far I could get with all of these vehicles. So I had a great time grinding the vehicles, but now they're just going to sit in my hangar not doing anything for a very long time, and now I've fully researched the Soviet tech tree, so there's no point in even touching that anymore. So the thing is, if I'm able to grind out, 8 top-tier vehicles in 13 days, I don't expect anybody else to be able to get even anywhere near close to that when it comes to trying to get the ground vehicles as well, the aviation, all of the aviation and the helicopter vehicles. And therefore, you sit in a situation where, because you're not given enough time between the two things, between, being told you need these vehicles and the event starting, because remember, when we found out what vehicles we needed, we weren't even given a start date for the event. So therefore, the only little scrap of information we had was from Keofox, who said it's probably going to be, in 2 to 3 weeks, which isn't enough time. Turned out it was 2 weeks, not enough time for the majority of people. Especially when you look at least the Tech Hub, or if you look at this channel. If you look at the demographics of this channel, the majority of people are in their 20s, between normally around 20, I think it's 22 and 34, and they all have jobs, they all have things to do, they all have families, and this is something, that we run into. We're not all 16 to 18-year-olds who don't have, responsibilities. A lot of us have to do other things in our lives, and therefore, it is impossible to be able to do this. There is a simple solution to this, though, which is 3 to 6 months, preferably 6 months before this, when you actually start planning these things. Hopefully, I hope you start planning these things, as long as that, maybe even more. What you do is you just put out a simple news post. Hey, in the next season of World War Mode, we're looking to do top tier. We're looking to use top tier Soviets, top-ranking Germans, and top-ranking US from the aviation and ground. If you are interested in competing in the next season of World War Mode, these are the general layouts that we're looking for. So then, at least you know what trees to work on. At least you can be prepared instead of be left with, well, let's just say terrible vehicles, which is what they were. So now, the next point leads from that, the fact that there wasn't enough time for people to prepare for this World War Mode, especially since it was a top tier one. The imbalance caused by this, and the aggression also caused by this. So, if you look at World War Mode, the Gaijin were courteous enough to give people default vehicles if they didn't have the standard vehicles that were in the operation. But as usual, these default vehicles are nowhere near the strength of any of the vehicles which you could grind. So a lot of people are going to point out one specific vehicle to counter this point, which is the G91R3. Yes, it's a very good ground attacker. That's about it. If you put it up against the MiG-21 SMT, the MiG-21 is going to eat it for breakfast. Simple as that. So yes, in the ground pounding role for one of the operations, at least, the G91R3 was available for Germany, and it was kind of funny how straight after the operation it got nerfed when it came to its Nords. But if you look at every other scenario, when we started the Fulda Gap, if you didn't have any of the vehicles for Germany, you had a Leopard 1. And you could face T-80Bs. Good luck. On the first operation, when the servers were working, I faced a lot of Leopard 1s against T-80Bs. I didn't die against Leopard 1s. I didn't really die against anything. We kind of just rolled everything. And then on the other side of the equation, T-55As versus Leopard 2A4s. Or BMP-1s. It's not a fair matchup. There's a reason why in General War Thunder we have a BR system. And the whole point of the BR system is so stuff like Leopard 2A4s don't go up against BMP-1s. And T-80Bs don't go up against Leopard 1s. But in that scenario, they fixed it slightly, and I mean slightly, by changing the Leopard 1 to the M48, because at least the M48 has APFSDS, at least it can do something against the T-80B. It's also a much larger target and much easier to hit with a T-80B. So therefore, it just got creamed every time. Then you look at the air balance. The aviation balance was terrible in this World War mode. The SMTs dominated because, well, they're in close quarters, they're highly maneuverable, they have R60s, they're able to pretty much do what they want. The majority of air domination battles I went in, I was able to get, 4 or 5 kills, and it was just picking on people who didn't have the vehicles. And even against Phantoms, because of, the fact that the Phantom seems less maneuverable maneuverable than the SMT in a small area, it was really easy to pick them off too, and they're also huge. Phantoms are massive. But the thing is, it turns out it's not very fun, close quarter missile thunder, especially if you don't have missiles, if you're in something like a G91 or a CL13, compared to, something like an SMT, even if you have AIM-9Bs. It's not a fun experience. As I said, there is a reason why we have a BR system in the game to try and stop these things happening. And I hope all of you historical guys who have been talking the last 3 years that it would be great to have historical matchmaking in the game, I hope you shut up now. Because now you have a taste of what it would be like at high tiers. And it isn't very fun from anybody's point of view. So, at least after this World War mode, if anybody ever brings up historical matchmaking, now I have 2 points of course. I have World War II Chronicles, which I thought was actually a pretty fun game mode. And then I have this season of World War mode to point to, and then ask them if they played it. And if they didn't, then I'll explain to them why historical matchmaking is absolutely awful. So, yeah. The problem with this, right? So the problem is twofold with this imbalance. The first one is, as I said, it's not very fun just getting smashed over and over and over and over again by certain vehicles. And the other thing is, it didn't really matter too much if you're a single player, or even for the squadron with Tech ES in the end, which one was the more dominant side, because instead what you did is you picked the side which you had the vehicles for. So instead of picking for, what would be, the actual competitive side, which this is supposed to be a competitive game mode, so that's supposedly what you're supposed to go for, instead people were picking just for the vehicles that we had. In Tech ES, the majority of our people had Soviet vehicles, and they had high-tier Soviets. But there were some members who had American vehicles, and also some German vehicles, but not as much as the Soviet stuff. So even if the Soviets were at a disadvantage, or even if we hadn't worked out, specific ways of playing with them, we had to, in the end, play Soviets a lot of the time. Because if we didn't, we would be ending up in situations like AMX-13s versus T-62s. And if you've ever been in a situation like that, it's not exactly fun. So yeah, it's, I think that was the main issue when it comes to World War mode. I think it made the whole experience terrible for many people. And I even have a lot of, because when I asked, for people's opinions on World War mode, there was a lot of people who basically DM'd me and said, yep, I'm part of a squadron, whether it be like Tech ES or whether it be another one. And they said, I didn't want, after like the first 2 or 3 operations, I didn't want to play with the squadron. Because what would happen is I'll be put on terrible vehicles because I don't have any of the other ones researched, and therefore it would be a negative gaming experience because they don't get to do anything. That it's all well and good for the T-80Bs, like the 5 or 10 that you have on your team, which are just annihilating the enemy. But if you sat there in a BMP, or if you sat there in a T-55A, you're doing nothing. You're doing absolutely nothing. You exist. Right? Or you're going around repairing T-80Bs. You are a glorified repairman. And it's not fun. So a lot of people just went straight on to just doing stuff solo, so they could actually play the stuff that they actually had, or just, away from the squadron, because it just made more sense for them to get the challenges done, because they saw, this World War mode season as just a blowout. And as I said, I don't blame them. I don't blame people when we were trying to play America for the Israeli side, that people were getting annoyed, because as I said, they had to get in AMX-13s against T-62s, and it just wasn't a fun experience, right? The next point is the new mechanics built into commanding breaking the game. So this is something which we've seen for 2 seasons in a row now. The last season, Attack from the Sea, was the new transport mechanic, right? The transport mechanic, which with the boats. So you could use ships to transport units around the place. This was heavily broken on the first iteration of the Philippines map, and on Kirk Eltigan, it was broken on the second iteration of that map, and also the first when people figured it out, when you could pretty much use the boats just to island hop units across. And that was a new mechanic which was added, which was a very cool mechanic, but it broke the system. It broke the whole operation. And then when you have this season, which was the helicopters, where you could pick up and drop infantry troops, it broke the game. When it came to the Fulda Gap, you were able to finish the Fulda Gap missions you were able to basically finish them when it started in about 5 minutes, and sometimes 10 minutes, if you kind of cocked up the strategy. But it was just ridiculous. It basically meant that battles didn't exist. They just didn't exist at all when it came to actually happening, because the commander could just win so quickly. There was also issues on the other one when it came to, I can't remember what it's called, the battle for the Chinese farm, where on the Soviet side of things, the Egyptian side, the helicopters, for some reason, got more fuel than the American helicopters. So therefore what happened was, if your planes were tied up in engagements with other planes, which you could easily do, all you had to do is you just had to run the American helicopters out of fuel, and then you could just plop infantry around the place willy-nilly, and then just pick them up, drop, pick them up, drop, pick them up, drop. And because once you capture the zone, it stays captured even if you pick up the infantry again, as long as it was connected to a zone, you could just create a line with 8 minutes, worth of use of the helicopter, and you could just win the battle like that. There were many times that I saw people like Tech FS and also Tech ES and other squadrons where they had done better than their opponent. They basically outsmarted them, they'd beat them in all the battles, they'd hammered their units, and then one infantry unit on a helicopter at the end of the battle, because it had more fuel than everything else, could just blop, 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 blop. And the commander on the enemy team was given a victory that they never should have had, right? And this is one of the problems of the game mode. If you want to introduce these things, if you want to introduce these new mechanics, you're going to have to do them a little bit more subtly than them completely breaking the game. And this is just an inherent problem with World War Mode, because every single game you play is a ranked game instead of others. And this gets into another issue which would simply solve a lot of these problems, right? A lot of these problems. Why is there no practice mode? Why is it in a game mode which is supposed to be seen as a competitive mode? Why in the hell is there not a practice mode? Even worse than a practice mode, why is there no unranked mode? Why is there not a time where you, maybe a week before this stuff is ready, or not even just continuous would be the best? Why is there not a way that you can challenge another squadron to a fight and it not be worth ELO? Why is that? Why does everything have to be a ranked game? Because then you can't test new strategies, because then you can't work out how to play the game, and you also can't have like a friendly fixture against other squadrons, which at least from my point of view would be really cool. A practice mode would mean that you could develop strategies and either take them into the game or report them to Gaijin just to show how ridiculous a lot of the strategies are, especially when it comes to these new mechanics. It is very obvious to me when we look at the fact that when you have any of these new mechanics added, it fundamentally breaks the mode, that the testing for this mode is not good enough, right? It's as simple as that. It is not good enough, and the fact that every time we have an operation, you need multiple changes, whether it's from the point of view of how mechanics work, such as not being able to capture zones behind enemy lines, or not being able, or changing the amount of armies that each side has. It is obvious to me that a practice mode or a testing mode is required so you can get feedback on this game mode. We have had now 3 seasons where the initial operations that you have produced have been incredibly imbalanced, ridiculously imbalanced, and have been figured out within half an hour to an hour, even sometimes 10 minutes once people see the reinforcement timers. This is an obvious problem. An absolute obvious problem, which leads to the fact that the majority of top squadrons just play one side, and then they end up just playing people from like 200 or 300 and just smashing their face in, which cannot be a fun experience for those individuals either. And it is mind-boggling. If you think about it, any other game which has a ranked mode, any other game, even in War Thunder itself, you have tournaments, right? You have tournaments in War Thunder, and guess what? You can play on the custom tournament maps. They exist in the game. You can give them a go, you can set different rules, you can even create custom games around this. If you look at games like Dota 2, they have a testing area so you can test different heroes. Even League of Legends, one game which for 5 to 6, maybe 8 years after release didn't have a practice mode for some godforsaken reason. They still had unranked mode, they still had other game modes, but now as well, they also have a practice mode. Why in the hell, if you want this to be the competitive part of the game, or if you want this to be late game content, which I've heard so many times, which is just ridiculous. This should never be late game content, or just for people who have played the game for, many years. Leave this shit alone and go back to stuff like tournaments, go back to that area, go to squadron battles, go to all of that crap, right? Simple as that. But anyway, the whole point is, this game mode cannot progress if you don't have stuff like practice modes. Because then people can't develop stuff. People can't work out what's going on, and you just throw everyone in blind, and it's just whoever works out the cheese quickest. That's it. That's all it is at the end of the day. And it's really, really sad. Because if you said this to anybody, if you said this to any game which is supposed to be competitive in any way, that we're just going to throw you in there and you're just going to have to work it out on the fly, they would tell you to just go away. This is a horrible system. It kind of reminds me with what they're doing with the Overwatch League right now, where if you don't know the way that the Overwatch League works, every so often, I think every week or two, they ban certain heroes from the hero pool, and then people just have to play without those heroes. So now you have to create whole new strategies within like half a week before you play competitive games in a competitive environment. That's still better than what we have now in War Thunder. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's a farce. The whole thing is a farce when it comes to this. But yeah, just put one in, please. It cannot be that hard to do. Even if it's just an online version, an offline version, just like a single mission is or something, where you can just plonk it in, and then from the same computer, you can move each side. It cannot be that hard to do. And if you're worried about people, working out cheeses, and then using them in ranked gameplay, that's already happening within like 10 minutes anyway. So there's no point. Like if that's your worry, or just like it is when it comes to releasing data on vehicles, when it comes to win rates and stuff, that people are just going to play those vehicles over and over again, just give up with that idea. It is a weak idea, and you need to move on from it. It's ridiculous. The next one is only 2 operations were available this whole time. The battle for the Fulda Gap and the battle for the Chinese farm. This made it incredibly repetitive to play, especially because of the server issues in the first week, which obviously I don't know why they happened, but sometimes stuff like this happens. It is kind of how it is, and at the same time, it's it's understandable that you have these problems, but because of the fact that there was 5 days straight of these operations, playing the same maps and the same modes over and over and over and over and over again with the same vehicles became incredibly monotonous for the majority of people, especially if you didn't have the vehicles, because you just got your head stomped in over and over again. Oh, how wonderful. So yeah, that was a bit of a problem. Commanders just not getting compensated for doing well, but instead the amount of commanding. There is a problem right now with the way that commanders earn points in the leaderboard. There is a quantity over quality. If you look at somebody like Sound and Fury, which is probably the best example of this, or from last season when we had Nito and Tom in Tech ES, what you can have, and Nathan as well, what you can have a look at is last season we finished, I believe, 9th, and none of them, I don't think, were in the top 50. And then you have Sound, where I believe Tech FS has actually finished 18th, and Sound and Fury finished, I believe, 56th in the commanding, and he was the only person who commanded any of the Tech FS stuff. He commanded all of the battles. So it just shows that a squadron that has finished 18th in the rankings has their commander finish 56th overall. This is ridiculous, and it just shows that it is more favored in the quantity side of things over quality, which is not really how it should be weighted. It should be weighted more for the commanders who do really well in their operations instead of the ones who just play the most. And I know for a fact that, you do just want, you want commanders to play a lot of battles or play a lot of operations, but at the same time, you do have to reward people who do well, which is how the system works for ground battles, so it should be how it works for the overall operation. There's no rules or stipulations which are there against creating stuff like mega squads or poaching players throughout the game mode. I know for a fact that from at least our squadrons, we had a few players who were poached by different squadrons, and then also the fact that, if even you could use us as an example. So we created Tech FS, I think, on the 30th of June. Which was like a day or two before World War Mode started. Put it all together, it was designed for the North American time zone, so people from Tech ES who were part of the North American time zone went into it, so they would be able to play more, and this basically meant that we could create a squadron within a day to be able to compete and get them into 18th place. And the fact is, if you are able to do that, or if you're able to do it on a larger scale, and basically just collect all of the best players in the game who normally just hang out in different separate squadrons all the time because they actually play against each other in tournaments, and, it would look a bit odd if they're all part of the same squadron. The fact is, it just becomes a mess. And actually promoted in a way to just bring all of the best players together in one or two squadrons and just smash face. And I think, at least personally, there should be some kind of rule with squadrons where they're just locked for the foreseeable, well, not for the foreseeable future, but let's say they get locked like a month before World War Mode starts. So therefore you can't do this. Therefore, if you are committed to a squadron, you have to be committed to a squadron, instead of being able to, move about willy-nilly, especially during a World War Mode. As I said, there were many people from the squadrons who were about 10 to 20th who just magically turned up in some of the top squadrons just over time, especially some commanders who we'd played against were put into, some of the top squadrons. Just, it kind of is how it is at the end of the day when it comes to that stuff. So yeah, there is definitely a bit of problems with that. The fix is to, as I said, free squadrons, so people can't just amalgamate squadrons a day before the event. Instead, stay in the squadrons that they're actually part of. The certain maps being too large or too imbalanced to make any sense in the game mode. There are a few maps like this, but the main one, which was actually added in after all of the operations started, was Big Tunisia, which is a simulator map where it is the large Tunisia. It has two little towns, and it has a hill in the middle, and it also has outpost spawns, hills to sit on to camp. And when this map was added on the first day, I heard a lot of people from the large map community who were like, hey, this map's awesome. I get to sit on the hill at the back and snipe people. Isn't that awesome? And then you realize the majority of the maps that you play on Big Tunisia are assault or defend maps. And if you die once, it takes you the majority of the time to get back over to that side. I believe if you died over and over again, you had about 3 spawns where you would be able to go and capture the enemy spawn. The enemy capture point, and that's really just not good enough. It meant that if you got an organized squadron against another organized squadron, and let's say it's a 20 versus 20, the larger you make the map, the more in favor of the defenders it gets, because it means that once the defenders get a few kills against the enemy side, they're not going to be able to get to the battlefield very quickly where you spawn next to the defensive zone. So you just put the more and more in favor of the defenders over and over and over again, which just makes it much easier, to defend. And since stuff like Big Tunisia, was added where you could just sit behind the hills at the back and just wait for people to push and then just keep clapping them, it made it some of the most easy defensive missions I've ever done in a game. You just basically sit there and then just wait for them to come out of 2 separate areas and just shoot them and then do it over and over and over again. And assaulting, because the recordless rifles were all over the place, it made assaulting not really a nightmare, because generally Tech ES are pretty good at assaulting, but it was really annoying to play. Incredibly annoying to play, if I'm honest with you. So the next one, and this is more of a commander issue, the auto battle RNG. So there was a few strategies which were used by commanders, such as picking up infantry units with helicopters, dropping them on top of artillery to try and destroy the artillery, or stuff like intercepting helicopters with planes. And many of these scenarios would create like 80 to 20%ers. So it'd be 80% win for the infantry, 20% win for the artillery, and then 80% win for the planes, 20% win for the helicopters. Because of the RNG, if you lost that battle, let's say infantry versus artillery, yes, the artillery would get crippled, but you would lose that whole infantry unit. So this basically meant that you would just down an infantry unit, so therefore there was a hole in your lines and you weren't able to create, the thing that you wanted to create. And with the planes versus helicopters, those auto battles could actually screw you for the whole operation, because those could mean if you lost that auto battle, like the helicopters won, therefore you didn't have enough planes to be able to counter their helicopters, or you didn't have enough planes to counter their planes coming out from different areas. So you can see how that can be a real issue when it comes to these auto battles. And a lot of the time, especially when I was watching Tech ES and Tech FS and other squadrons, if they lost a specific auto battle, you could see that it had ramifications like 50 minutes later. So it meant that even though you'd been playing this map for 50 minutes, at the end of the day, you're gonna lose, because of the fact that you lost that auto battle 50 minutes ago. And it's a really, really annoying experience, if I'm honest with you. The next one is the removal of markers. I know a lot of people seem to be happy with the removal of markers, but I'm not. I don't really understand why they were removed. It was the only thing that actually helped this game mode with people who play arcade. And the arcade community is quite a large community. They're quite a nice community. There's always a good rivalry between realistic players and arcade players. But overall, it's just really sad that they took out the only thing in World War mode which compensated for arcade players. Why are we just making this just a realistic mode? Why is that a thing? Why is it that, in every other part of the game, arcade and realistic stuff is represented, but for some reason in World War mode, we're just making it realistic gameplay? Why is that? Why are markers such a large issue for a lot of players? Do they just want to sit at the back of the map and be able to get 10 kills over and over and over again? Maybe they do. But at the same time, it makes the gameplay a lot more fluid if you see markers around the map. It makes more sense because you're supposed to be in a structured squadron. Therefore, you'll be able to see, targets all over the place. And in a 20-man, which we were running, losing markers didn't really make any difference because of the fact that we could just call out where targets were, we could ping the map and all of that stuff, and just kind of show and also scout, to show people where stuff is. But the thing is, if you're arcade players, well, you just get screwed by this, and there's no reason to do it. Absolutely no reason to do it at all. The next one is scouting assists not counting as assists for the tasks. This is a problem which has been brought up with the Operation Heat and Operation Frost events, and I believe it's the same issue that we have here. Because of the fact that if you didn't have, the major MBTs, or they weren't available to spawn, a lot of the IFVs and light vehicles had scouting. Therefore, the scouting ability should have counted towards the should have counted towards the overall assists for the challenges, because it just makes more sense, and it has done. Even if you want to increase the amount of assists that you need per World War mode star or whatever, just do it. So we put in scouting assists. There's also no way for commanders to complete the tasks. So if you're a commander who is trying to be competitive and trying to be dedicated and running operations in both time zones, you don't have time to actually get the tasks. So you don't have time to get the kills or the assists or anything like that. There should be something like, if you're a commander and I don't know, you win 2 operations, then you get the star, maybe 3 operations. That would fix that pretty easily, but that just seems to be a little bit of an oversight. Once again, a problem with the commander, who is supposed to be like the centerpiece to this whole thing, is not getting duly rewarded. The next one is the automatic battles take too long to start. If you think about it, automatic battles take 30 minutes to begin, right? And 30 minutes is a quarter of the operation time. That is a long time for a battle to begin. I know the idea is, you're supposed to hop between battle to battle to battle, but if you set up a bunch of battles at once, that's obviously not going to happen. Or if the defender forces, a ton of battles at once. Like one of the key parts of defending from the German side on Fulda, especially when they kept buffing the German side because the Soviet side could just walk past them, was just to force as many battles as possible, so you could just tie up units before they could, move past. So yeah, I would reduce that to maybe like 20 or 15 minutes, so therefore we can keep the gameplay rolling. The render distance for a recoilless rifle AI seems a bit all over the place. Sometimes I was able to see them, sometimes I wasn't able to see them. Sometimes you could see the infantry members on the gun, but sometimes you couldn't, so all you saw is the gun, but then it started firing at you, so then you realized it was alive, even though it looked dead. And also the fact that, especially on that Tunisia map, because of its size, I was sniped across the map many times by a 106 recoilless rifle. And I would actually say these AI defenses were much worse than the World War II ones. Even though the World War II ones could be deadly as well, they didn't just get ridiculous shots with their shells throwing in. The next one is, because of the previous issue of people not having vehicles, this actually created a lot of haves and have-nots in squadrons. So this means that certain players were actually prioritized over others, and this created kind of a 2-tier system. So this meant a lot of people in the second tier who didn't have the vehicles they found it a lot harder to actually just get the stars for the vehicles, because they wouldn't get in as many battles, or they wouldn't actually have as many of the vehicles to be actually combat effective. And this meant that this didn't really force, but this pushed people way further to doing solo battles, because it was just more time efficient for them. As I've said, a lot of TechES, TechFS, and a lot of our members who are over the age of 20, which are, I would say, the vast majority of them, do have jobs, do have families, do have other things. So they can't just sit around for a whole day trying to do operations. So yeah, it is definitely a bit of a problem. But that's basically the list. As you can see, it's taken a while to get through it for obvious reasons. This was the worst season of World War Mode, by far. It had the most broken mechanics. It had the most imbalance due to vehicles and also commanding. It was one which was the most gimmicky when it came to just trying to break the system instead of to play it properly. It was the worst in terms of just overall usefulness of the World War Mode. I hope we go back to a World War II setting, so the majority of people can get the vehicles, and if we stay in this alternate history modern setting, we're at least told about it way more in advance till we also can do it. But none of this matters if a practice mode is not added. That is the key factor. A practice mode is required. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Battling Bacon, Blackie, Chris Giltnane, Conte Baraka, Daniel Stanton, Elove Goat, Jay Wilt, Martinez, Trigger Hippie, Universe, Eugens Terry, and also I'm Devilish and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.